I'm Rachel. I work at DataON in marketing. Today we have two Microsoft MVPs for you. We have Philip Elder and Jan Kappen. They're both going to present as usual. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat or unmute yourself and ask questions. And with that being said, I think Jan's going to take the floor first.
Okay, thank you. So I have a small slide to share just for some introduction. So I'm an MVP since 2015. First I was inside of the storage group, and then everything was combined in the cloud and data center MVP group. And yeah, I founded my own company beginning of last year, 2020. And I'm working with Storage Bases Direct since the beginning. Before I worked with the Storage Bases technology, also based on 2012 R2. I wrote some German books about Hyper-V and System Center with some other MVPs. I'm blogging a lot, I'm speaking on conferences, and yeah, that's my small introduction.
Okay, and then did you want to present on, I can't remember what you were wanting to present on today, Azure Stack?
We can talk about combining Azure Stack HCI or legacy Storage Bases Direct and backing up, bringing up a lot of speed and boosting your backup. So of course we can talk about all the other stuff and all the other things you want to talk about. So I have just some loose topics about using it as a backup system or backing up your system when you use it for a hyper-converged infrastructure.
Okay, awesome.
So
and then,
do you want me to start completely, or do you want to have Philip to introduce himself?
If Philip wants to introduce himself, and then we can go back to you and you can get started.
Okay.
Sure. I have been around for a little while as far as technology goes. No spring chicken, if you will. Been working with tech since the early 90s, got into it formally in the late 90s, or actually mid 90s when I decided to, or had the decision between getting my certification as a mechanic, or a buddy of mine was starting an IT store. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. And that kind of got me. Been around Microsoft products since day one. Started out on NT3 something and Windows 3 and all that fun stuff. DOS 5, I guess. Started with Hyper-V in 2008, Longhorn. So before the RTM of the product, ended up building the first cluster on an Intel modular server here, probably in North America. We worked with both Microsoft and the Intel teams at the time. Had a lot of fun doing it. Took a long time to get it right. Made a decision to do server core and server core only for all clusters, and we still maintain that through to today. Got into storage spaces, and that's where DataON and us started getting into a business relationship. We have a number of DataON solutions out there. Very good, solid product. Storage Spaces Direct 2016, and same thing. We've always had an admiration for DataON and what they do as far as getting right in there and sticking with the punches, because we both know how painful deploying, Jan, you as well, as painful 2012. There were a lot of things that were important features needed in storage spaces that weren't there until 2012 R2. And even then, we still had our issues in 2016 and 2019. We've had a few hiccups, but things seem to have smoothed out a fair amount. So my MVP started out as small business server, and then high availability, saved my bacon at the border going into the US to visit a client one year. And now it's CDM, something cloud data center management, but still high availability is my specialty. My technical term, or whatever you want to title, is technical architect or senior technical architect. My wife and I own our company, have since 2003. And we've been doing quite well at it, enjoying it. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'll pass it back over to Jan to get us started.
Okay. Do you still see the slides?
No, I don't see your slides.
Okay, because I'm still in presenting mode. Okay, do you now see the slides?
Yeah, now we can see them.
Okay, great. So yeah, Storage Basis Direct, or now as Azure Stack HCI, you can use it for a lot of things. Of course, you can use it as an infrastructure to run your virtual machines on, or to run the storage based on this. And for me, I'm using it since years. We started in 2016 and running the first hybrid systems. And what I now can see is the amount of systems you can run is, or you can run in a constant way without having a lot of issues, is getting smaller. And I really quick decided to go with DataON as a vendor, because it's a whole package. You can use everything, and it's well combined. And I really love working with DataON. And what is very interesting, you can get a very huge performance. Since 2020, I'm running a lot of flash systems. Sometimes it's all flash because the customer can afford it. That's really nice, and you can get a lot of performance out of such a system. And of course, you have to think about how to back up your system and how to increase the speed you can use, and how to restore the systems very fast. So normally I'm running Veeam. Veeam is a very fine piece of software. Working with it since the first version, I think it was 6.5 back in the days. And since then, they're doing such a great job, and everything is working with Veeam. So when you run your system, you can use Veeam as a very good and very performant system to back up your data, to back up your virtual machines, and you can use it in a very nice way. So if you have a converged system, so your storage is at the bottom and you have a lot of virtualization, then you plug in your backup infrastructure into your SMB3 network, and you can benefit with this kind of performance. Normally I'm running 25, 50 or 100 gigabit multiple times for connecting your Hyper-V systems to your Storage Basis Direct infrastructure. And you can also bring in your Veeam nodes. Normally in this kind of installation, you have multiple nodes to achieve the speed, or you can even use your Hyper-V machines to work as an agent for the backup system. And so you can write about multiple gigabytes per second to your backup target if the backup target is fast enough. And also restoring the data is very fast, because you can use SMB3 as a protocol, and you can make it very fast. On the other side, if you have a hyper-converged system, or you can use also the Azure Stack HCI infrastructure, everything is combined. Normally it's 3 nodes, sometimes it's 4 nodes. I don't have this big customers going to the hyper-converged world, because the bigger the customer is, the more they decide to go to the converged model, just for increasing the virtual machine possibilities more than the storage load and the storage need. So the smaller customers go normally with a 3-node system, sometimes a 2-node system if it's a very small customer, or maybe it's a small site company they are running, then it's a 2-node system. And even with this, you can get the speed because of the SMB3 network in the background, and you can link in your Veeam systems. You go with your SMB3 networks, and then you can you can fetch your data, and yeah, you can use 25, 50, 100 gigabit. If you have an all-flash system, for example, I made some benchmark testings for a customer. They were using a 2-node all-flash system, and we got the chance to go inside the SMB3 network because of the 100 gigabit switches, and I was able to pull off about 14 gigabyte of data per second from it. So you can read up to 14 gigabyte on an all-flash system. That is very fast. So the backup window was very small. It was about minutes, and the system before it was hours, and it took a long time. It was an iSCSI SAN system, and it really took sometimes even in the morning, and the backup was still running when they came to work. And now it's done within minutes. That's very nice. And even the Azure Stack HCI system is included in the Veeam support. So yesterday was the release party of version 11 of Veeam Backup and Replication. So the new version is coming, and now the support is also for the higher version. You can see it here on the version 11. You can even use the Hyper-converged Azure Stack HCI system to run backups with your Veeam if you want to. So this is a small screenshot from the Microsoft Docs, and you can link in to your Ethernet and plug in your Veeam system and then fetch the data from it. That is very nice. Any questions about this kind of technology? How many of you are using Veeam as a backup system?
I see some VRs in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, so how's your experience with it? Do you use a dedicated network, or are you using the SMB3 network for the east-west traffic? What is your configurations? Anyone wants to share or want to know some things about it?
Well, I'm not afraid to speak up, so I'll speak a little bit here. So we don't use Veeam. We actually use DataON, because we've had issues where we have used Veeam in the past or other Windows type backups, and we've had customers that not following rules and our security protocols have been virus attacked. Their servers got BitLockered and end up their backups same thing. And fortunately, on some of them, we had them doing offsite stuff as well. We've tried to stick with a Linux machine backup. Of course, then we can't use SMB3. We're having to use agents on the virtual machines or on the host to be able to get the backups. But most of the stuff we're doing is 10 gig connectivity, all flash backup DataON systems. So backups and restores are still happening at a pretty good speed. Veeam is a good product. Just wish they made it in a Linux version. It's nice to be able to separate the OSs out.
Yeah, I'm very excited for the new possibility to use Linux-based storage and then use the immutable option on this new Linux-based file systems. So with version 11, you can use, for example, XFS, the XFS file system, and Veeam is now capable of placing an attribute on your backup file based on your Linux file system. And within this attribute, you can say, okay, this file may not be overwritten for, let's say, 14 days. So ransomware is not able to touch this file and to encrypt it. there are also some other big storage system who can use it. There are some cloud providers also can bring this. AWS is one of them. This morning I installed a Veeam system for a customer, and we are using Backblaze as cloud storage solution. So you can add your local repository, and then you add an object storage within your Veeam software, and you can define that if you do a backup, that the exact moment the backup is done, you can push your backup to your object storage within the cloud. And within this storage bucket, you can use, for example, at Backblaze, you can also define, okay, these files are not going to be overwritten for 14 days. So it's ransomware immutable. And that is very important. I see this at a lot of customers. They just store some files on a SAN system or whatever, and they don't think about what happens if the system will be cracked and if the data will be encrypted. Because a lot of customers don't use Airgap backups, and that is a huge risk in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a tendency to put in a lot of 2-node, so we don't have to put in a pair of Mellanox switches in between our 2 hosts. But we typically sell at least 3. They have 1 as an offsite, and we do replication to it. So if the cluster was to fail for some crazy reason, they do have a replica, but it's still not a backup. And getting your customers to understand that you still have to have a backup. And so even if it replicates over, we're still doing backups, and we offsite. So, but people never want to buy that 3rd server.
Yeah, I also had this discussion a lot. Yeah, and of course they want to spare the money for the switches and for the 3rd system, and a lot of customers are discussing about why do I need a third node just for having a 3rd copy of my data. And yeah, sometimes I'm going with the nested resiliency to have a local copy within the system and then spread the copy to a 2nd node. But of course, you only have 25% minus the reserve you have to calculate. So it's a lot of overhead on the system, and that's also a big discussion point. Yeah. So yeah, Taylor had a question. Do you experience with backup window of NVMe cache and HDD-based S2D Azure Stack HCI arrays? If so, what's performance been compared to your all-flash examples? Yeah, normally for a backup system, we are not using all-flash. I'm very sorry, I have no customer who is able to spend money for an all-flash system for the backup. So normally it's always a hybrid system. The performance is, of course, lower. It all depends on the amount of cache you put in the system, because the cache is always the first tier written to. It always depends on the size. So I'm also doing some installations where we have a tiered backup system. So we have, for example, NVMe as the first capacity tier, and then we have a 2nd tier with the HDDs, and that is one possibility. So you use the tiering technology from the system itself to alter your data to the HDDs. Another thing you can also do is you are not using an S2D system. So you are using, you do not use one system, you use, for example, 2 systems, and you have a very fast one that can be made of all flash or SSDs. It depends on the performance you need. And then you make a backup to this, and you define a small amount of time. So let's say 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. So when your backup is gone or your data is gone, and you have to use this kind of data, then it's very fast to restore. On the other side, you can also use the Sure Backup functionality within Veeam, so you can test your backups. You can have a look if it's running, if it's coming up. Are there some errors within the machine, or is everything running great? So this can be very fast, but it's only a very small amount of time. So 2 days, 3 days, whatever. And after that, you do a backup copy job to the second tier, and that can be a hybrid system. And that can be very large because of the big amount of data you want to store. On the other side, normally it doesn't get too large because most of the customers then are trying to archive the data to a very low cost system, primarily in the cloud. So that's what I see. So for a backup system, in my case, normally hybrid is fully okay. For running virtual machines and your primary workload on it, I would prefer to have a look at the current need. Sometimes it's very nice to use Flash, but sometimes it's overkill and not needed. Depends on the numbers you will get from the customer, so you have to take it for yourself. Yeah.
So Jan, how much data are most of your clients using? How much are you backing up? 5, 10, 15 terabytes?
I would say 5 to 15 is the primary amount for the most cases. I have some customers that we talk about 50 to 100 terabyte. And that is not even the unused and old crap. It's really the current workload. And normally they're working with a lot of data for drawings. I have a customer who's an architect. They have a lot of plans. They have a lot of big data, and they need a big amount of storage. But normally it's, I would say, 5 to 15. Sometimes it's 20. So it's an area where you can have a look at the full Flash systems in 2020 or 2021. On the other side, normally you will get a lot of storage space if you go with the normal HDDs and hybrid system, because they are 10 to 14 terabytes nowadays. And so you plug in 4 or 5 drives and you are at 50 to 60 terabytes. Yeah.
But how many, on an evening backup though, I'm assuming you're doing incrementals, but what's the amount of backup? Not total amount of storage, but I mean, how much are they backing up? Initial backup, of course, is everything. After that, typical incrementals.
I would say some 100 gigabytes.
Okay.
Depending on the customers,
Sure.
It's some customers also have a lot of RDS farms or Citrix farms, so the amount of change is very small. Yeah. It's just for having these systems and. Okay, so we have another question from Bronson. He wrote, I would be interested to learn your storage design for the Veeam Backup target, as well as the throughput it's capable of. Yeah, like I was talking before, normally I'm trying to bring in the Veeam Backup systems within the SMB3 network. So when we talk about an hyper-converged infrastructure, we only have the data between the nodes, running the mirroring between the nodes for data being changed or being written to the systems. And if possible, I'm going to the 100 gigabit NICs to be capable of doing some other things with these cards. And this is, for example, plugging in Veeam to this networks. I'm a huge fan of separating the SMB3 networks. I'm still creating 2 or more separate segments in the network, normally with a different VLAN tag on it. So I know the Microsoft guys will tell me that's totally not best practice, but it's running rock solid for years. I'm still doing it because I totally have no issues with it. I don't like the switchless thing. I mean, yeah, you can save some money, but I don't like the the switchless communication because it's against normal network rules. So, so he says, what DataON products are you spec'ing out? Okay, so normally I'm trying to use the HCI 2012 nodes, I think. They have these 12 slots. Normally you go with the 3.5-inch drives just to have a lot of space. What I'm trying to avoid is to use JBODs, because you have this one single cable between your node and your JBOD, and that sucks in my opinion. So yeah, it's a parity installation normally, because you don't need the speed of the mirroring, and so it's the double parity. Sometimes it's the mirroring if you need the speed. Normally that's mirroring, or it's mirroring when you want to use the sure backup thing a lot, because you need the IOPS on the systems. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments for Jan? Oh, looks like Ernie has.
What size is your cache? That depends on the amount of backup you have to write into the system. So it's a little bit like Tim said, what is your daily change rate of your backup? So I'm looking at this, and normally it's, I would say, 10 to 20%. I would say it depends on the size and the customer, but it's not 40 or 50%, because normally the customer needs the big amount of space and not the performance at all.
Okay, if that's all, oh, maybe not yet.
How many simultaneous backups can you run with parity storage? That is also depending a lot on your flash size. I would say you can easily run 40 to 100 virtual machines being backup in a large system, and if it's a smaller system, normally there aren't so many virtual machines. Yeah, so I would totally focus on the cache. Have a look at the data, what amount of data is being backup, what is the daily change rate and everything, and this is a huge factor for sizing your backup system. So I don't have this one magical number for all customers, so I just have to look at the current situation and the change rate and all the other informations you don't get from a customer if you ask them. So. The main issue is too much backup time, not enough time for dedupe. Want to increase simultaneous jobs, but throughput is still a limiting factor. Okay, yeah. Do you mean deduplication on the file system, or do you mean the deduplication within Veeam itself? Because that's also a huge factor. I'm normally going with the Veeam deduplication, not with the REFS deduplication. Okay, so I'm totally not using DBM since I would say 2012 or whatever. So the Windows deduplication, normally I'm using it only on virtualized file server systems, not on the S2D system itself. So I don't like the idea of deduplicating your data for your virtual machines, for all virtual machines. So I'm not going with the leader feature. If they need more space, they have to buy more drives. That's my opinion and my sizing thing. Yeah, Veeam is doing deduplication within one job. So that is also very important to know. When you have, let's say, 20 or 40 jobs, there is, between these jobs, there is no deduplication if you store it. So you can only use the Veeam dedup feature if you put in your VMs you want to back up within one job or some jobs. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on. If Philip wants to take over.
Hi. As far as churn goes, so that's, I guess that's a different industry, but from some contract work I've done in the past. But when it comes to your data and changes in your backup, so churn, the amount of data that changes, our experience, so looking at, say, DataON has the K2N, so Kilo 2 Net November -212. It's a 2U 12 3.5-inch bay setup where you can have your typical SAS or SATA spindle, which generally runs about 200 to 210 megabytes per second, mega in bytes, whatever MIB. So if you have 12 of them, you're running about a gigabyte per second of ingest for your slowest, your capacity tier. On the SATA side, you're going to have probably 3, or on the cache side, you're probably going to have at least 3 SATA SSDs, or in this case, because your bays are going to be full, you would have a couple of NVMe add-in cards of about 1.2 to 2.4 terabytes or thereabouts, and you're running 4 10 gigabit ports, let's say, for your north-south, your ingest ports. So you're at about 40 gigabytes, so 4 gigabytes per second. Realistically, your throughput, your ingest rate for each node is going to be about a gigabyte per second or thereabouts, depending on how things fill up and how much churn is happening and whether you're tuning your destaging into your capacity tier, which is a recommendation as well for storage spaces direct. So my experience along those lines is you can tune things depending on the components through the whole stack, from network to your cache tier, like you're saying, Jan. But you can expect anywhere between 800 megabytes per second and a gigabyte per second of churn, a constant ingest on those 2 particular nodes. At least in my experience with our setups here. So let's see. Where am I going? I'm going to share this. You all see that?
Affirmative.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to focus a little more on the big picture, 25,000 foot view. I know some of y'all, I recognize your names, so you're all going to look at that and go, oh, this is all stuff I know. So this is more focused on the idea of, okay, I'm interested in a DataON solution. I'm interested in Azure Stack HCI, or I'm interested in Windows Server Storage Spaces Direct. What are my best practices for architecting a solution that we can expect, A, to run smoothly, stably, give us the performance we're expecting, and if something does hiccup, continue to give us reasonable performance despite losing a tire, if you will. So in the Direct Connect, we do a fair amount of 2-node Direct Connect solutions. Primary reason for that is we SPLA the license. So in small to medium businesses that have preference for on-premises, that's what we do. It works really well. We usually set up to 25 gigabit single port or dual port. Mellanox tends to, for us up here in Canada, the dual port units tend to be a little easier to get than the single port units. So we tend to set up 2 physical dual port Mellanox network adapters per node, connect them and give them 2 subnets and VLANs. Now, we program for Rocky. We are an all Rocky house here. So we run Mellanox NVIDIA for all of our infrastructure, east-west, and in larger cases, north-south. I'm not a fan of iWork just because, and we can have that discussion over a beer or spirits or whatever at some point, because that can get pretty religious. But the reality is that east-west, we give 4 ports. And the reason for that is if one of the network adapters crashes, we still have 2. We still have 25 gigabits of throughput. Now, in a small setup like this, let's say it's 2 SATA drives for our cache and 6 or 4 in the case of the Kepler 47, 4 spindles. So that gives us about 800 megabytes of ingest, constant ingest per second. We can expect our 1.2 to 2.4 terabyte SSDs each, so about 4 terabytes of cache to handle about 250,000 to 200,000 read IOPS and about 125 to 100,000 7030, give or take. It really depends on what the SSDs are and the overall setup. And then the D stage again is about 800 megs per second. So we can get pretty decent performance out of a 2-node setup, amplify that a little bit with the 3-node. In that case, we're in the same boat as Jan, dedicated. So that 2-node setup will have a pair of 10 gigabit ports. As an FYI, avoid Intel 700 series 10 gigabit network adapters for your set virtual switch setups because they just don't play nice at all. So if you're going to go 10 gigabit on that side, go simpler with an X500 series, so X550, X557, or look at setting up a pair of switches or something along those lines, Broadcom, perhaps Q Logic, I believe, and running with those on the north-south side. In your 3-node direct connect, you're going to have 2 physical adapters, dual port each. And as you can see in the second drawing, there are 4 paths between each node. And this is critical. So you can put 2 physical adapters, 2 single port adapters in there. But if you lose an adapter, you've lost 50% of your east-west throughput. And that's pretty substantial, especially in a 3-node. Your expectation with a 3-node setup is your churn, your data change is going to be a lot higher than it will be with a 2-node setup. Therefore, losing 50% of your east-west is painful, and it's noticeable. So with 4 ports between each node, you gain that extra bit of bandwidth and redundancy, resilience. If you lose an adapter, you're not getting such a big hit. When it comes to setting up the Rocky iWork side of things, in our case, like I said, we're Mellanox NVIDIA. We always set up the operating system with the DCB, so Delta, Charlie, Bravo, Data Center Bridge, ETS, I can't remember what it stands for at the moment, Enhanced Transactions or something, I can't remember, ETS, and PFC, Priority Flow Control. Gotta love acronyms. And the VLANs as well. So if we're in a situation where we have a 2-node direct connect and we need to expand that to, we would end up with 4 nodes. We can drop 2 SN2010s in there, set them up with our little scripts, get them up and running, plug the adapters directly into those switches, into the ports that are programmed for them, and boom, we got 4 nodes. We're moving our storage around once our storage jobs are complete, but we have everything we need. It's good to go. It's happy. So that's definitely an important consideration for us. Whether it's direct connect, well, if it's direct connect, the physical network adapter ports get programmed for Rocky V1, V2. so DCB, ETS, and PFC, so that we can just plunk in a switch at some point and we're good to go. We do tweak things as far as the VLAN settings and the subnets, but that's all in our documentation. So we have that all managed. Now let's see.
So Philip, are you doing just 2 VLANs or 4 VLANs? You know, do you do,
we do 2.
SMB1, SMB2, no live migration? I can't remember what the other one is off the top of my head, but typically 4 is what it used to be.
In the 2-node 4 ports, we would set up 2 VLANs because we have 2 switches. If we're going to plunk down switches at a future, you're over there. Okay, let me move this to the other screen. We have 2 switches that we're going to drop in there at some point. And when we have 2 switches, we're going to have 2 VLANs. Therefore, the green ports will be on, let's say, VLAN 1020, and the gray ports will be on VLAN 1040, or whatever they end up being. When we drop the switches in, they're already programmed for the ports that those network adapter ports are going to plug in to for those particular VLANs, and it just works. Everything's happy. It should just be essentially plug and play. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, originally when S2D came out in 2016, we did what Microsoft's recommendation was, which was 4 VLANs, right? You had SMB1, SMB2, live migration, and cluster. So your cluster talked on 1. And Jan can step in here too. I'm assuming he still does VLANs, and we do 4 VLANs typically, still. And that's one of the things so we can separate our traffic. Of course, you have QoS across all 3 of them, separating them out so that you never lose your cluster capability across there. Your SMB traffic with QoS set up on there, you're reserving at least 50% just for the SMB traffic. So the question is, how many VLANs do you set up? Because Microsoft has gone to just 2, SMB1 and SMB2.
We've never done more than 2, but keep in mind that in our case, if you look at the 3-node setup there, the orangey brown connections are dedicated ports for north-south. So we're in the same boat as Jan. We always set up a dedicated set of ports for our east-west traffic. They run on their own dedicated VLAN. With the introduction of Server 2019, we can quas live migration. So live migration will always find, if it's set to SMB, it'll always find the fastest path that it can get between the nodes. And that'll always be your east-west traffic, because our north-south tends to be 10 gigabit E, not 25 in most cases, unless we're completely converged. In that case, we're running a set vSwitch on 1 pair of ports, and we have a dedicated pair of ports for our east-west traffic, and we're bumping our throughput from 25 gigabit E to, say, 50 gigabit E, or even 100 gigabit E, depending on what our storage setup is. So no, we've never run more than 2 VLANs since 2016 started. We were building STD back in the day, right from pre-release through, and it's always been 2. The live migration situation was definitely a painful thing when we didn't have quas ability for controlling how much bandwidth it soaks up. So a lot of us saw some pretty weird behaviors with storage going offline, VMs going offline, because our live migrations were basically soaking up our east-west traffic pipe. As far as cluster heartbeat, cluster doesn't need heartbeat anymore. It'll go across the production network. It'll beep itself across or ping itself across the production network. It'll use east-west. As a tip, if you will, when you set up your storage networks, you make sure you disable DNS update on those network adapters, those network ports, I should say. You do not want your subnets showing up in your AD DNS for your storage traffic, because obviously it's not routable. And there's a number of times where we've been called in to help out with some problems, and it turns out that they had DNS entries in their AD for the storage network, and then cluster sitting there going, well, where the chicken did you disappear to? And things start going sideways on them. So make sure that's a very, very important thing. PowerShell, it's a one-step thing. We do all our setups in PowerShell. So
Philip, this is Mo. Quick question. Where are you moving your management traffic from? For example, if you have to do a backup using Veeam or something, then is it dedicated ports, or are you just if you could add to that?
Yeah, in our converged situation, we would be running a VNIC that's QoSed, so we could run it on its own subnet to our backup destination. In a smaller setting, it really depends, because like Jan was saying, they don't necessarily want to spend the money on a separate server for backups. Even a Linux repository that we're getting access to here in V11 of Veeam, we still need some sort of box in there. The Kepler 47 setup is really nice. It's inexpensive and can be used as a high availability backup destination. Even like I said earlier, the K12 unit, that's a really sweet setup for backup. It's not that expensive relative to what you get. You can run your S2D and then run Linux VMs on top of that for your repositories. And there's an airplane expression, balls to the wall. You know, when you throw your throttles full forward, that is basically what you get when you start getting into that performance side of things, where you're using your Rocky iWarp network for backup throughput. So you're pushing into the 25 gigabits per port for your backup. And that's an architectural discussion we can have outside of this discussion here. If you like, you can always ping me. Does that answer your question?
Partially. It's just east-west traffic. I mean, since you're using all the east-west ports for S2D traffic and other VLANs, other traffic, which physical ports are you connecting out for a secondary backup box to, if you're going to back up some of the VMs out there?
That would be the north-south ports.
North-south.
Yeah, because there's, let's see, if we're architecting for a firm that's running 1, 2, 5, 10 gigabyte CAD files, 3D Studio, 3D rendering, where 4K, we've got one client that's running 8K video now. So we're talking gigabytes per second of file throughput that's needed just for the work that they're doing or moving the files around. We're going to architect for that, and we're going to compensate for that by having a set of dedicated ports for our backup traffic and a dedicated set of switches. Or we'll usually have extra ports on our SN series, the Mellanox switches. So we would set up a dedicated network for that. And it would be on its own subnet, and it would be on its own VLAN. But that's a fairly unique situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bronson. ETC, right? Is it ET? Yeah, maybe Edmonton Transit Service, so ETS. My dad's always writing ETS, so that's probably why ETS was stuck in my head. Okay, any other questions? We have about, what time are we? I think we're good to 1:30, correct?
Yeah, we have time still. So if anybody has any other questions.
Okay, so from here, we'll move on to 2-node, 3-node direct connect. As far as 3-node direct connect, I like your hesitation and reservation, Jan. It's a good thing to hesitate about direct connect at 3 nodes and up, because you lose a little bit of resilience. As far as with one node going down, things get a little goofy and a little sideways with the way network has to travel. So without a switch, obviously you don't have a direct path per se, and things, let's just leave it at a question mark. It works, but in a 3-node situation, if we're running 10, 20, 30 VMs per node, they're low churn. So if we have a VDI solution, let's say, where everything's relatively static, but we need the memory and we need the processor footprint across the 3 nodes, and our storage is okay. That's all right. Direct connect is great. But if you're starting to get into SQL, online transactional solutions, if you're in situations where you need a lot of I/O in a short period of time, you get a couple hundred users logging in at the same time, that kind of thing, that's where your east-west and your switching will come into play. it's a feel thing, if you will. It's an experience thing. I mentioned earlier about being a mechanic or getting into I was in my final year basically, but my focus was on high performance. So the difference between a 10-second car and a 15-second car was probably about $15,000 and this. And the difference between a 200,000 IOP 7030 type solution set that's going to function for your 5-year solution life, which is what you would expect with a DataON product without reason, then the solution needs to be architected for that 5-year solution life. So just because you got 200 today doesn't mean you're not going to have 300 or 400 or 500,000 tomorrow or 5 years down the road. Or all of a sudden we've got one client who's taking on a new business. They're a surveyor in Texas actually, and they're taking on a new business using drones, and all of a sudden their nice little single server setup has gone from, okay, we really need a lot of storage coming up here. So there's always that possibility down the road. So keeping things relatively open is important now.
Yeah, and if you don't go with the 2100, you can always go with the 2010. So it's 4 times 100 and 18 times 25 gigabits, and it's a little bit cheaper. And
yeah,
often you can argument with the how to make backups and how to make backups fast. So
yes, yeah, and when you're getting out there, if you're looking at a node that's 30, 25, 30, 40, 50, $75,000 each, depending on where you're starting at and where you're going to, and the ability to add a node down the road. We worked on a project with DataON where they had their initial set of nodes, and then a little while down the road they needed to add another one. So we talked about how to re-architect things a little bit to settle in that 4th node, and then they're probably going to need another one or maybe even 2. So that is another aspect to the architecture. It's one of the wonderful things about storage spaces direct, I think. After the many years of doing shared SaaS with storage spaces, it used to be a lack of density for ports on the JBOD. And then we got 16 ports, we got 8 on each side, and now we got controllers that can run 4 ports on each controller and blah, 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 blah. So flexibility was all of a sudden it appeared, and then storage spaces direct came on the scene and we went, wait a minute. I think the world's going that way now. I know I was really disappointed when Microsoft said shared SaaS was going to be deprecated, because initially I thought, oh no. But now I'm looking at it going, yeah, whatever. So this next drawing, so we'll focus back in on my little drawing here. So 3 nodes switched. This itemizes what I was mentioning earlier and relative to your question there. Two dedicated network adapters, or network ports, I should say, for east-west, 4 ports in this case. And then we have 2 VLANs subnets. So each VLAN gets its dedicated subnet, and they're usually coded for each other. So if our VLAN is 1020, our subnet will be 10.20.x.x, whatever the case may be. So we tend to keep those 2 things together for documentation simplicity's sake, and KISS. Keep it simple, bleep, right? Because we're talking about systems that are extremely complex, and the simpler we can keep things, the better it is when we're in a stressful situation when something goes bork. Boom. Then our documentation's relatively simple. We have a place to start. We're not so stressed. We know what we're doing, and click, 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 click. Well, in our case, it's cut and paste, cut, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste for the Powershell. So as an FYI, relative to the backup situation, you should be able to take, let's say, a 4-node setup that has NVMe cache, SATA capacity, and a decent backup solution set with the 25 gigabit east-west, north-south. You should be able to restore, depending on what your solution set is, you should be able to restore your VMs at a good, let's see, 2, 4, 6 gigabytes thereabouts per second, depending on all of your factors. But if you got flash on both sides, you start looking at the pull speeds for your backup solution set and what it's doing. Say we can saturate 4 10 gigabit ports, however that ends up being. So of course your throughput's going to vary based on the network path, if you will. But the cluster itself with the scripts on hand, your PowerShell on hand. We leave a flash drive. We got these guys here. PNY makes similar things. I don't know if you can actually see it. It's a little nano flash drive, 64 gigabytes. We have an image that we use that we format this thing with using Rufus, plug it into the back of the server, and it never leaves the server. As part of our maintenance, we update the installer files and the driver files and everything on it. So we have this 4-node that's gone kablooey, and it happens. Let's say a patch, bad patch, whatever the case may be. You don't lose your storage, right? All your metadata and everything is there. So you can go and install a fresh operating system using the RMM, KVM over IP, install all 4 nodes, get it configured, connect it back to your Active Directory, get the cluster stood up, import the storage, and you should be back up and running within an hour to 2 hours. Your cluster should be ready to roll. Your VMs should be ready to roll so long as we're not dealing with any corruption on that side or water in the data center. I remember seeing a picture out of Europe where your suites are all glassed in and there was a water fire suppressor malfunctioned and filled the closet with water. That's a different situation. Then we're restoring somewhere else. But realistically, with PowerShell, you should be able to restore that guy pretty quick. So we have our two dedicated NICs for east-west. We have our 2 dedicated NICs for north-south, and that's where we're going to put our backup traffic on a VNIC and the set B switch. And again, as an FYI, avoid those 700 series Intel NICs. And we use, again, we're setting up for Rocky. So our configuration across the board, it's hard for me to remember everything because it's all cut and paste. We have a set of variables that we tweak for the name of the cluster node and the networking setup and the VLAN ID and all that. We tweak all that in the PowerShell and then we just let it run. So remembering sometimes every little step that's involved in setting one up is a little bit of a challenge.
And please don't use Rocky without configuring Rocky correctly.
That's correct.
Also bringing your cluster down very fast and you get a lot of issues. I saw this multiple times. They just plugged in the cards. The card was enabled with Rocky and the switch was not enabled. And that will come to a mess very fast. So.
Yeah, and the other thing on that point is you've got 3 points on your network path. You've got your source, you got your switch, and you got your destination. However, if you've got 2 switches, so we'll put them together like that. What is that? Peace, live long and prosper. You've got your 2 switches and you've got an MLAG of 2 cables, let's say, between those 2 switches. So now you've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. I find that these 2 tend to be missed. There'll be one of them will have the right VLAN setup and the right configuration on them, but the other one won't. That tends to be, especially if you're doing top rack, that tends to be one of the weaknesses I find too, is the network gets set up and then one of the ports along the way is missing or misconfigured. Dyslexified, I'm dyslexic. So it's dyslexified, whatever the case may be. So whenever you start experiencing east-west traffic, the first thing to look at is to make sure every single point along the way has exactly the same setting. It's just like jumbo frames. If you've got jumbo frames here and here, but not on your switches, things go sideways. And if you got jumbo frames here, but not here and here, on the outside, on the endpoints, things go sideways. Or if you got jumbo frames just on one point, etc., it makes for a mess. So our tendency, as I mentioned, depending on the workload, is to switch. And we start off with a pair of SN 2010 Mellanox NVIDIA. They've pretty much finished their transition to NVIDIA versus Mellanox. So I still have to make that transition because we still have a lot of Mellanox equipment here. That's branded Mellanox equipment here. So that's what I see a lot of. Any questions?
I think we have a question in the chat from Bronson. He asked, can you script out the configuration of the Mellanox SN 2100?
Yes. We have a couple of different scripts that we use, and we just pump it into the CLI and away it goes. It's a step-by-step process that I do, and I do that purely, like I said, I'm dyslexic. And a fellow MVP, Thomas, Ben Thomas, he encouraged me to get VS Code set up and the PowerShell extensions and all that fun stuff. It took me about a year before I grew comfortable even with the idea, because coding for me is extremely intimidating. And now I'm actually programming switches. So I prefer to do those step by step versus just pumping in a script, because I like to see what I'm doing. It helps register it in here so I don't make it all upside down, which is bad when it comes to programming Mellanox switches. So yes, it can be scripted. Do I do that? Not necessarily, because I do want to see the settings go in one after the other, after the other, after the other. And just as an FYI, because of the transition with Mellanox, our sales folks got transitioned. So we just virtually met with our new sales folks and video sales folks, and had a sales engineer and an actual technical engineer on the call. And there's actually, in the new Spectrum switches, one command, Rocky, enter. And it does everything. It sets up PFC, ETs, PFC. Oh, gee whiz, sorry. It sets up all the DCB settings, the ETS settings, or ETC settings, whatever, PFC settings, and all of them are done. Then all you have to do is the PowerShell in your, on each of your nodes, VLAN setting, and you're good to go. So it's been greatly simplified.
Yeah, one thing about the Mellanox switches, just like most of them, Cisco, HP, Aruba, Brocade, once you get a good configuration between your two switches, because normally you put them in a pair, once you get the configuration, you're done. You can dump that config into your switches very easily from the CLI. So it's nothing that you have to do as far as running a script. You're basically just copying a configuration file in. So it's pretty simple once you get it configured. And DataON actually has 99% of that stuff done for you. So if you've got switches coming from DataON, they actually have the configs and stuff already there. You may have to tweak them for your VLANs per se, if you're using different VLAN numbers or stuff. But I'm an HP Master Ace, been doing switches for 20 years, so it's actually quite a simple thing. Nothing to be intimidated about. DataON will help you with it if you need it.
And then the last little point here of discussion is throughput. So when we first started with Storage Spaces Direct 2016, there was not a lot of guidance on how do we set up, especially in a hybrid situation. It's kind of like what happened with storage spaces back in the day when a bunch of folks went, oh, yay, we get RAID 6 with parity, 2-drive parity or 1-drive parity, RAID 5, yay, we get it in software. I don't have to buy those really expensive RAID cards anymore, blah, blah, blah. And then when all of a sudden the support forums blew up because they were getting, 30 megabytes per second of throughput ingest, 40 megabytes per second. And they had 20, 30, 40 spindles, 60 spindles in a big JBOD, and they were getting 80, 100, whatever the case was. It was dismal. And folks are going, well, what's going on? Well, Microsoft eventually realized our documentations was a little shy, and so was our experience. So we ended up in a situation where we had to start talking about cache. We had to start talking about what cache does for ingest. And then we had to start talking about destaging. We're talking storage spaces, and we're now talking storage spaces direct, because the technology that's underlying storage spaces direct is essentially, I won't say it's the same thing. Obviously, it's an iteration down the road, and it tends to improve, as does ReFS, which is the underlying file system that is used in storage spaces direct. So what you have here in storage spaces direct, the initial guidance was, 5 to 10% cache, a couple cache drives. We ran into folks that were putting one cache drive across 12 spindles, sometimes 2 cache drives. HAT, sometimes 2 cache drives, but they were tiny. They were 200 gigabytes. Oops, that's really tiny. They were 200 gigabytes each. So you had 400 gigabytes of cache, and let's say you had 12 4 or 8 terabyte drives underneath it all, and you ended up in those cache devices were SATA, and you ended up with a situation that was just sad. And they tried to run parity, of course, or dual parity. It didn't work very well. So the same situation, storage spaces, we ran into a problem with configuration. Whoa, parity, dual parity, yay. Nope, doesn't work. And with storage spaces direct, same thing. We ran into an issue where the initial guidance was kind of not there. The experience was kind of not there. No one really knew what, where, when, how, because there wasn't enough experience with the various types of workloads to really get an idea of what kind of cache device count we need, what size that cache device needs to be, and then what our capacity tier is going to be. So our guidance as far as how we architect, we start off with the smaller settings, like the Kepler 47. We would have a couple of 1.2 terabyte SSDs and 4 SATA spindles, preferably SAS. There's a little bit more performance in a higher I/O setting with SAS than there is with SATA. So we have a about 800 megabyte per second D stage in a 4-drive setting. And with a couple of SSDs running our cache tier, we're probably going to see about 125,000 IOPS, which is really reasonable in a small setting. If you're running E3 or what's the newer setting, the 2200 or 2300 series Intel Xeon, so the small guys, 128 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah. Oh my goodness, my brain is just not working here. So 128 gigabytes of RAM per node, and a couple of good-sized SATA SSDs, and your capacity, 14 terabyte, 16 terabyte spindles. So you end up with a pretty nice little setup and decent performance. Put 10 gigabit and 20, a couple of performance, decent performance Rocky or iWarp if you're into that for your east-west traffic, and away you go. Once we start pushing out into all SATA, and you get up into 16 to 24 SATA drives, your enterprise level drives are going to be about 450 megabytes per second each. So you're starting to push into the, what is that, 450, it's 4.5 gigabytes. So you're starting to push into the 8, 9 gigabytes per second of relative performance. SATA, real performance, it's not going to be that high, obviously. In our experience, it's enough for most situations. It's a reasonable cost performance-wise. So what you end up with, as far as, I'm usually the vocal one in the room at MVP Summit, and I make no bones about it. I'm independent, so we own our own company, and if you want the real meal deal, I'm not a fluff guy. I'm not a marketing guy. I'm just technical and blunt. No tact. I don't sale either, so I don't even know that too well. So back to all SATA SSD flat, we're going to start running 4 25 gigabit ports guaranteed. When we're at 2 to 3 nodes, when we get into 4 nodes to 6 nodes, we're going to start looking at 50 gigabit. For our east-west, we're going to start looking at converged, so we can get that throughput, the happy throughput across the board for north-south as well. And if you're looking at that, if you really need the performance, so you're starting to push into needing gigabytes per second to and from that cluster and the virtual machines running on that cluster, then you start looking at dedicated north-south ports that are running on RDMA as well, or at least 25 gigabit north-south. Once we get into the NVMe SATA SSD capacity type relationship, you're pushing into ultra high performance. So definitely 4 25 gigabit ports for your east-west dedicated, and then whatever you decide to do for your north-south, whether it's a couple or 4 or 10 gigabit ports. It really depends. NVMe flat, you're going all the way. It's 100 gigabit.
Philip?
Yes.
Do you have a lot of installations based on NVMe and SATA SSDs?
We have a few. We've got a number of situations where we just need that churn, the IO churn, where things aren't changing a whole lot, but we do need that IO. And that's where NVMe really makes a big difference. So on that point, our preference is 4 cache devices, 3 in a 12 drive setting or a 24 drive setting, keeping in mind your ratio of cache to capacity. So in a 12 drive, 3.5-inch drive setting, obviously 3 devices, it's 1 to 4. But in a 24, we're 1 to 8. So we start pushing at that level, we want 4 cache devices. Why? Because if we lose one, sorry, that's my phone. My kids switched it to the cat one year and I never stopped because people look around their feet for a cat. So our tendency is anything, 3 nodes, 3 cache devices. Anything performant, 4 cache devices. And the reason for that is A, you lose something, your performance hit isn't going to be that bad. You still have the right ratio. So you go from 4 to 3, your binding will evenly distribute until you get your 4th replacement device back in, or the broken device replaced. And we've seen a few of them. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was asking because of the small price difference between NVMe and SATA SSDs nowadays. So normally for me and my deployments, it makes no sense to go to a hybrid NVMe and SSD installation. You normally can use all NVMe.
For here in Canada, things are still, the disparity between SATA and NVMe is still pretty high. We pay a fairly hefty premium, probably about 20 to 25%. So when we're buying from the US, we're also paying the disparity between the Canadian and the US dollar, which tends to be about 35%. Okay. So, and then there's the tariffs and all that fun stuff that when we buy from the US, when we're shipping back to the US, which that's what I'm sure what DataON, you guys are based in the US, so you deal with that all the time. So as far as all NVMe, there's a number of question marks around switchless because you're in a retimer situation when you have 24 NVMe drives. I don't see personally the cost justification. And speaking as a Canadian, to run 24 NVMe drives at this point on a platform that's PCIe Gen 3, and limited PCI Express lanes, primarily because it's just like running 2 100 gigabit ports. So a Mellanox ConnectX-5 or ConnectX-6, where you've got 2 100 gigabit ports on a PCIe Gen 3. Your one port's neutered. It's half. So do you see the performance? Timing wise, maybe. It's just like sharing 24 drives on an expander that has 8 actual ports back to your controller. So I think SATA makes most sense in that situation. And then if I really need a boost in I/O, I'll go for 4 NVMe drives and leave the rest SATA, just to keep a nice balance. That being said, Samsung has 15 and 30 terabyte drives in NVMe and SAS SSD, and price-wise, they're very reasonable relative to what you get when you're looking at higher density solutions. So again, it depends. That depends on where it's going to go and what it's needed for. And that's the other side of it. I didn't mention SAS. Intel's got a nice setup with that. You can drop a JC Juliet Charlie 080 IO module onto their motherboard, and you get your 24 ports of SAS across an expander. Or if you want those full 24 ports, you drop in a 24 port SAS HPA, and you have full 24 port throughput across those ports. SAS SSD is a cooker. It's a cooking with gas situation. Vastly more performant than SATA. Not as performant as NVMe, but cost to performance wise, very reasonable. Something to look into. And that about covers where I was going as far as architecture goes. So SATA, SSDs are pretty much our happy point. Everything's tough to get up here right now. It's fairly tough even for our suppliers that are accessible via the United States. Things coming across the Pacific seem to be going really slow right now. There's not a lot of shipping containers out there for whatever quote unquote bleep political reasons. But for the most part, when we can, we do, and when we can't, we work with what we can. Thank you.
I think we need to do this more, guys. No Howard talking, no John Marlin talking, no Jeff Mosley, all these marketing stuff we do. This is pure geek, two geeks out there, MVP, very well respected, talking their perspective design. Actually, I learned so much from Phil today. Very much all methodical on how you think. I know you did that for the mutual customer we have. And Jean Kappen,
I can see Howard's lips moving, but can you guys hear him?
Yeah.
Just kidding, Howard.
What? Now you're scaring me. And
5 by 5.
And Jean Kappen, you know, your Veeam design is very interesting too, because you know, we actually need to learn from you, and our customer needs to learn from you guys as well, because a lot of people here, you know, they listen to us, and then we try to deliver the best practice. And a lot of stuff you guys are talking about are really the best practices in the world. Sometimes it's a lot of like your design feel of 4 NICs for east southwest traffic. My gosh, that's how many PCI adapter can I put on that server, right? So, but I think the next topic when we get there will be the Ice Lake platform. Will be a very fun discussion topic, guys. That's coming in 2 months, and I think we got one. We got an Ice Lake and an Intel platform in our lab already, guys. I was looking at it. I was like, I don't know, I was dripping saliva. Like, gosh, what is this thing?
So you're flying us out to Anaheim so that we can like not be buried under snow?
As I said, I would never miss this event ever, except my mom had a COVID second shot, and there's no way I would say no to my mom. So I had to just go. And now that my old family is taking COVID shot, you guys can come over to my house all day, man. We got to go party, man. I don't care. I'll do some covert spirit parties going on. I'll do it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of great topic coming up, and I think we should do more of these. Just technical, geeky, design, sharing knowledge, because to me these are the meat of this community, right? These are, you guys are all very technical more than me, but so thank you, Jean Kappen. Thank you, Phil Elder, for continue to help us. And these are our partners. They are someone we call extended DataON family, right? Because we will refer any customer to them for help, which I have done many times, and because we trust the fact that they really know what they're doing, right? So thank you for jumping on today.
You're very welcome.
Rachel, anything else?
No, I think that's everything. Thank you, everyone.
Good stuff. Really good meetup. Thanks, guys. And we'll talk soon. Ignite next week. A lot of good content. I saw Jeff was on here. John Marlin's on here. Get that done. Then we'll have another meetup in a couple weeks, and we'll go into some more other geeky stuff. Okay.
John usually has something about Ignite that he's going to share.
John, do you want to throw something out that's like a little bombshell, and then you get fired for it?
Little hint.
Well, let's first off, I brought my white gloves, Howard, from your partnership Q&A.
White glove, I love it. I've been using that all day.
From an Ignite perspective, there's not going to be a lot of Windows Server or HCI stuff for this Ignite. That's going to be more reserved for, I believe it's the Windows Server Summit that's coming up in May. So that's when we'll have a lot of stuff. But I mean, we've got MVP Summit coming up, Partner Forums coming up, that you'll get some ideas there as well. But for the broader Community Windows Server Summit in May is where we'll have a lot of announcements. Now, Bernardo Caldas is my manager's manager. I think that's right. He's got a session. It's like a 30-minute session that he's doing at Ignite, where we're actually going to formally announce the new Windows, and he'll kind of mention a few of the new features that's going to come in it. It's not going to be a lot because he's got to cover a lot of stuff, but he will talk a little bit about it. There is an HCI. I don't know if it's a roundtable or exactly what it's called, that I know Jeff Woolsey and Cosmos will be on, but you have to submit your, ask permission if you can come, I guess, for lack of a better term of saying it. So you have to be invited to it, but you have to, say, hey, I want to be in it. But that'll be definitely something. If you can get in it, definitely get in it.
Are you saying you can't pull a string and get all of us in somehow? What's going on? We're not important enough to you?
I have to ask if I can go in it.
The next question is then, how do we ask?
The session builder is live. It went live yesterday. So if you're on Ignite, just go and look up Jeff or Cosmos, and you'll get the link there. So whenever normally you'll register for the session or put it in your backpack. There's a different button there to, I forget what it said. I was looking at it yesterday, but just click it and then fill it out.
If he can't do it, man, we'll just call John. Don't worry. I'm sure he'll figure out backdoor. I guarantee you he will. We'll make it happen.
Send a link out.
Yeah. Ernie probably bombed that thing anyways. All right, guys. Great session. Good to see you guys again. First one this year. I can't wait to see you guys face to face. This is driving me nuts, but we'll get there. Hopefully, second half this year we'll be all normal, and then we'll get together and have beers. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.